Welcome to the Content Matters podcast, where digital content and marketing pros talk shop. Tech may be changing fast, but great content is timeless. Get inside tips, trends, and practical know-how from the top minds in the digital content industry. Sponsored by Ingenix, the uniquely agile content management platform. Welcome back, everyone, to the Content Matters podcast. Today we spent some time talking with Ian Truscott. Ian is a B2B marketing executive leader. He's also the managing director of Appropingo, a name I love to say. It's his new company. He's been a CMO, a senior vice president of a number of tech companies, many of which you would know. He also did some time as a web CMS analyst for the Gilbane Group. All this just means that Ian knows a lot. He knows a lot about marketing technology, like content marketing, web content management, and all that great stuff, which was why we wanted to talk to Ian today. So our conversation kicked off with kind of a look at the content management industry and this idea of creating omni-channel experiences. But from there, we went into how he helps organizations build art, which he calls awareness, revenue, and trust. And then we ended with a look at personalization and his new digital publication, Rockstar CMO, which if you haven't seen it yet, I would encourage you to go find it and sign up for it. With that being said, here's that conversation. Enjoy. You've been in leadership roles at a number of well-known content management and content marketing technology companies over the last number of years. Man, I was looking back at your LinkedIn profile and I couldn't believe the places that you've been that I didn't even realize.
I saw you stop by.
So what do you consider the most important changes in the content management industry based on all of your experience?
Well, that's a really good question. I think probably the important change has been a shift from an IT-centric point of view to really thinking about the experience and how you're going to serve the content to the consumer. I think maybe that pendulum swung a little bit too far, and I'd like to hear what the rest of your questions are like and whether we get into discussion of that. But I think that that's probably the thing that I've seen where these tools have turned from platforms. I mean, I was at Vignette in 2000 where basically it was just a bunch of APIs and a real heavy IT build to really an expectation from the business user that this is a business tool that they need to use on a daily basis. And of course, that the level of experience that the audience is expecting over what people call omni-channel now, across multiple channels. And I think that's the biggest difference I think we've seen. To flip your question around though, I think that we've got a little bit carried away with stuff, and I think that a lot hasn't changed in content management, in that basically, and I wrote about this on CMSY, your old patch, and is that really it's still an interface to put content into a content structure or a database and well managed, and then publish to something. And I think sometimes we forget that, and we build all these different acronyms and these different things, whereas basically that's what a content management system is, and it has always been that way.
Yeah. Definitely a lot of different solution providers coming out, and everybody wants to name their solution different so that they kind of stand out. But in the end, when you look at the underlying technologies and the capabilities, they're all really very similar in many ways.
Yeah.
So it's like the more we change, the more we tend to stay the same, I guess, is how I kind of look at it.
Yeah, and I think that doesn't really serve the buyer particularly well, because I think in certain circumstances, people probably need a centralized content management system, but because something's called a DAM, they're like, oh, I don't know whether I need a DAM. Or on the opposite side, they know they need to store some pictures alongside their content, and then they're thinking, oh, I think I need a DAM, whereas maybe they don't need a DAM. They just need a decent content management system or web content management system that has some way of managing assets. So I think the problem with it isn't just about the noise the vendors create, but it's also about the way that the analysts as well are sort of segmenting, and we're getting carried away, I think, with some of these acronyms when some of these acronyms have a lot in common with one another.
Yep. So that kind of gives into my next question, actually, which is pretty good. You were actually also an analyst. You worked with Gilbane for a while, so you've you have that perspective of analyzing the market and stuff. And what we're talking about now like you said, is omni-channel experiences, or people who companies that want to build them. I think that very few of them are kind of really doing true omni-channel.
True.
And to offer that kind of experience, though, you have to have a different type of content management solution. And the technologies, we're going from headless to hybrid or agile. Like, and again, I
Yeah.
know we're getting back to acronyms, but is there a
Yeah.
right technical, CMS technology going forward?
Well, with my former analyst hat on and as a consultant, I think it'll be what's right for that particular
Yeah.
organization and where the pain is, which is the obvious answer. But what I do think is that I think we've always lived in somewhat of an omni-channel world, and I don't think that it's such a big revolution that suddenly your content management system or your web content management system can't be as omni-channel as you need to be. Now, not all organizations need to be completely omni-channel. And I think
Right.
the interesting thing about the omni-channel conversation is that one of the channels that's often forgotten is print. A lot of organizations, the majority of their content is either in print or on the web. But when we talk about omni-channel, we're also often talking about web, social, mobile, and those kinds of platforms, which have got a lot in common. And I think if you're talking about digital content, the word omni-channel is probably, it's a bit like digital marketing. It's just marketing. And I think if you're managing content, you're omni-channel managing content. It's, and I think that's the goal that people need.
Right. That makes sense. Okay. So your company, Appropingo, did I say that
Yeah.
right?
Yes, you
I
did.
like that name. It's kind of got a ring to it.
Yeah.
You're a consultancy. You help organizations create what you call art, awareness, revenue, and trust.
Yeah.
What does that mean? What does art really mean?
Well, this is from my experience of being a CMO and holding senior marketing positions and working as a consultant with various large organizations like NASDAQ and Amex and stuff, is that as marketers, and you've seen this also, Barb, in this conversation about growth hacking and growth officers and all that kind of stuff. For me, I think that marketing needs to remember that its role in the business is to do those three things, right? Get awareness, get revenue, and get trust. Now, it depends on the situation about which order you put those things in, but nobody wants to
Yeah.
create tar, do they? They all want to create art. So
Yeah.
I've gone with art. But I think, and I think if you think about those things, and I think one of the challenges that CMOs have and senior marketers have is making themselves relevant to the CFO and other members of the C-suite. Now, if you create metrics based on awareness, revenue, and trust, you're going to key right into whatever their metrics are. So if it's growth, if it's revenue growth, if it's customer growth, if you're working for a charity and it's about growing awareness, and obviously almost every organization, if you talk about revenue, you're talking the language of the C-suite. So I think that's why I came up with that. And it's something that I developed in my last CMO role, and just helped us all understand what were the top level metrics that this marketing department needed to deliver. And then from that, I could ladder downwards into the team as to how we needed to achieve those things, and also ladder upwards to the C-suite and say, this is what we're going to deliver in terms of these three key metrics that I want to do.
Do you think that the CMO is finally starting to get more of a time at the table in the C-suite than kind of they used to before?
It's hard to judge because, my experience is mainly in the software business, and I think there's a growing realization that features and functions. Well, I hope there's a growing realization that features and functions aren't going to win you market share alone. You need to have a great story, and you need to be out there. And I think when you see that with some of the more dynamic software products, recently you've seen that, for example, with Drift, who took a technology that wasn't brand new, being able to do chat. A lot of other vendors could do chat, but they wrapped it up in conversation marketing, conversation sales, and they put a story around it that actually people could then understand. And that's the role of marketing, is to do that, is to take these bright ideas and make them relevant to a marketplace and do that category definition. Because also that's what we were talking about earlier, Barbara, about the way that CMS vendors are being created and then creating their own category and their own acronym. that's the right thing to do as a software vendor, to create your own category, but it has to be differentiated. And I think that's what those guys did. And that's the partnership between marketing and the engineers and the bright folk in development.
So is that why you say, or I read that you said personalization doesn't build relationships, content does. Is that what you mean? Like the content is your story, is your narrative, and that's how you actually win customers?
Yeah, that was really a reaction against what you see in a lot of organizations is a strong focus on the front end delivery and on how people are going to receive the content and all the sort of personalization, the remarketing and all that stuff. And by the way, let's define what personalization means, but that's for another day, and we'll have to spend quite a long time on that. But
yeah,
it was really really what I meant by that was organizations need to focus on what is their story, what is the content that they want to get consumed. That asset is what is going to create that relationship with the end consumer. And of course, then we need to work on how we're going to get that asset to that consumer. And absolutely, we need to be relevant, and we need to be on the right channel. We need to be in the right format. And all that good stuff. But let's think about the content first, because that's the thing that's going to create the relationship. And then think about how we're going to get it to the consumer. Whereas at the moment, the conversation around content management is around experience, and it's around technology like headless. And I think we're forgetting about the content.
Yeah, I mean, definitely there's a lot of conversation about, we have to personalize, but if you don't have the content in the right story, what's the point in personalizing anyway?
Yeah, well, and the other thing as well is I think that every organization needs to personalize. And what I mean by that is you need to discover who are your tribe, who are the people, who is your core audience that you need to attract, and who will be your buyers. And then really lean into those people. Now, that may mean creating content that other people won't like or won't respond to, but they may not be your people. So you do need to personalize, you do need to be relevant, you do need to do that research. And that's about creating a great content marketing strategy at the beginning to say, yes, this is the best answer to my people's question. It may not be the best answer to other people's question, but I don't care, because these are the people that I'm going to go after. And I think that kind of focus is very relevant. I don't think you need to call that personalization and have 15 versions of that to appeal to every single persona, if 10 of those personas are of no interest to you really commercially.
That's kind of one of the challenges, I think, with some marketers, is that they're trying to build content or anything that hopefully hits a wide number of people, when they really should be narrowing down their focus, and they're on a very specific, ideal customer profile, if you can use the new terminologies that they really want. Like, and that's kind of a struggle for the content then, because the content becomes not as good, not as useful.
Yeah. Well, there's a number of challenges going on in the organizations that I've seen. One, and some of that is around metrics and the expectation of the teams that are doing those activities. So if the expectation and you're rewarded on creating lots of content and just jumping on the old hamster wheel, and whenever anybody from product says, build me a data sheet, you go do, then you're going to create a lot of content. If you're on the web team and you're getting rewarded because you've got lots of hits, then that's what you're going to go for. And what the organization actually wants, in what I was saying just now about getting this kind of focus, is really you need to do less and really focus on creating content and also measuring the engagement with the right people that are going to buy your product. There's no, I've said this for about a decade, is when I've presented about this stuff. If you want lots of web hits, let's train a cat to play piano, put it on and put that on your homepage. You'll get a ton of hits, but you won't get any engagement with you or with your products. And that's also the challenge, I think, with a lot of content marketing, because I think a lot of people are creating snackable, listicle, all that kind of very, very, it's like high sugar content, which is actually not delivering engagement with the organization or with the story or with the product or with the challenge that you're trying to solve. But it's great, we got loads of hits, but that's not what you want.
It requires the marketing team or the content writers to have a stronger relationship with other people in the company who maybe understand
For
the
sure.
customer better. Are you finding, like, with the clients that you're working with, that relationship across the walls, like, between marketing and sales and customer support, is that still something they aren't able to kind of get around, or even if they do get around, they don't get the relationship right? Like, one of the things that I kind of saw in a study was that, yeah, sales will tell marketing what they want them to write about, but that's
Yeah.
not how the relationship should work.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with that. That's not how the relationship should work. But the, the challenge is when we talk about all these different departments, and I kind of wrote about this a little bit on LinkedIn the other day, because I'm also in the fortunate position where I host executive networking events, dinners and breakfasts and stuff.
Yep.
And we talk about all sorts of things. But one of the common things that I see being talked about is about silos. And we can inside an organization, and we could be talking about any kind of business challenge. And a lot of organizations have the same challenges, and that's about silos. And some of those silos are created by what we were talking about just now, about metrics and measurement and what is expected of different departments. And that makes them protective of what their little silo, right? And they want to work with you, but they can't. You know, the organization is somewhat broken around that. And I think that's common in what we also see in organization. I think it's very hard for large organizations to make that change, because why do I need to? You're a marketer. Somebody in products tells you to create a data sheet. It's very hard to ask, who cares? Who's going to care about this data sheet? Why am I doing this? Because you have that. We've always done it this way. Let's go do it. We definitely need a data sheet, and we need one based on it, aimed at the techie, aimed at the marketer, and aimed at the CEO. How many times do we talk to the CEO? You can't. It's hard to ask those questions, and really, that's what needs to start happening is asking these questions. And also, I think when you start breaking down these silos between the organizations, you actually create less content because everybody's creating their own thing. So sales think they need this particular asset, and they create their sales presentation and story. The people in support need to create, but if you all bring it together, you actually can bring a lot of efficiency to your content development. Sorry, I went off on a tangent there.
No, that's okay. Is it the role of the CMO or the VP of marketing to kind of build those relationships?
I think this might sound odd. I think it's everybody's role. I think what's happened with our organizations is there's a shadow business inside every business, and that is the production of content, right? But we don't recognize it at the same level that we would recognize HR or IT or even the production of our products. I mean, a lot of people say, the story is as important as the products. Somebody like Seth Godin would say something like that.
Right.
But I think that there's a truth to that. And I think that and there's an awful lot of money and time and effort being spent of an organization on producing content that's happening at the point of need, that a marketer is creating it, or some tech guys creating some tech docs, or somebody's creating a presentation, which actually is entirely inefficient. And nobody can really see, what's the story we're telling. Nobody can see how much it's costing. Nobody knows where the assets are. And I think we need to start, as organizations, we need to learn from publishers and think of ourselves as, we have two businesses: our core business, the service, product, whatever it is, charity that we run, but also we're a publisher of content that supports this other business. I think that's why I say it's everybody's responsibility, because I think it's been hard for marketing to sort of push this uphill. And I think that unless you've got the CFO engaged and he realizes, oh my God, I don't know how much money we're spending on content, then you start bringing change to the organization.
A quick pause to say thank you to Ingenix, the Content Matters sponsor. Ingenix is a leading provider of agile content management solutions. You can check them out at ingenix.com. Obviously, when you think this way and you agree this way, then you must believe in the idea of creating a content center of operations, to kind of manage content widely across the organization, as opposed to just in marketing or in sales or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. And I've started doing some work and thinking about this, and thinking about the fact that we need to stop if we think like publishers, and and some people talk about the content supply chain or whatever analogy you want to make, right? I've been thinking of content as a utility within a business that, you turn it on and, it's there and stuff like that. But if we start thinking about the production of content in a more sophisticated and operationalized way, then we start looking at the different aspects of creating content and measuring our success and how well we're doing more in line with the operation that's happening. Try and explain that. So at the beginning, when you're doing the ideation, you're asking who cares and all that kind of good stuff, right? And assigning it to the persona. But what I hear in a lot of organizations is actually there's a lot of challenge around the getting stuff done bit, right? In that, we can't do a blog because it takes 8 months to get something published. Well, there's something wrong in your content operations that we need to figure out what the problem is. You don't need to go off and buy a new blog platform or go off and talk to your agency. You need to figure out what's this challenge with content in your organization. And then, of course, and at the other end, we've then got people, as we were talking about just now, measuring the success of the content based on some crazy vanity metric that actually has nothing to do with the overall goal of the content in the first place. I mean, I had a client, one massive financial institution, and we did the content audit, and they were talking about getting rid of some of their content. And I love this story because it just proves, we all love stories that prove our point of view, right? So basically, this is perfect for me. I couldn't believe I had this conversation. So we were doing the content audit, and they say hardly this content is the least popular. We're going to get rid of it, and it doesn't do any hits, right? But when we went in and talked to that organization, and we talked to the people that were producing it, and we talked about their customers and that kind of stuff, we discovered that this was a highly, highly profitable part of their business. And they they were high net worth organizations that would engage with this content and then spend millions with this organization, right? So you're in your sort of marketing ivory tower and you see a page you don't fully understand. It's only getting 4 hits a day. And you think, oh, that must be rubbish. But it isn't, because it's incredible. Those 4 hits are, some of your biggest customers, for example. I'm talking a little bit extremes here, but do you see what I mean? And it's aligning all that stuff up. And I think that's why we need to take a bit more of an operational view of content production and from soup to nuts, really.
It sounds like you're saying, like, we're too focused on traffic and hits when we should be. It's less about how many people visit as it is the right people are visiting and then taking the next steps with us. Exactly.
And we're not running a popularity contest. We're running a business. And with most, I work a lot with software vendors, as you know, and if 10 people came along this week and they all bought a product worth $1 million over 3 years, they'd do their number and they'd be delighted, right? So I know that's extreme, but and I also think that what we do when we try and make our content popular is we make it wishy-washy, we undifferentiate it, and then we start looking like everybody else, or we have a new initiative and then we look at what our competitors are doing and then we make it, and the buyer, it just doesn't help the buyer, because at some point the buyer is going to discover that you're not for them. Better they discover it when they look at your website than after you've done an 18-month procurement process.
Right. So you're also a proponent of a content hub, in terms of kind of like a media site for a brand. Why are there times, like, why do you think it's important, and are there times when maybe it's not the right idea for a certain brand or type of brand?
I like your second question. I'll do the first one first. I think it's important mainly because of the industry that I work in. I think that lately influencer marketing has become a big buzzword, but it's always been the case, right? So but everybody, if you're a software vendor, and I'll say software vendor because that's primarily my experience. If you're a software vendor and somebody comes on your website, they are going to believe you're trying to do the Jedi mind trick and make them buy something, right? They're not going to listen to your thought leadership. They're not, even though you may have the brightest PhDs in the whole world working for your organization, unless you are going to have to do a lot to gain that level of trust on your branded website. And then some vendors get away with it and some vendors are great. I'm not saying it's the same for everybody, but broadly speaking, that's the case until you create some credibility of being able to talk in this, and people feel free with that. The other part of that is is that if we take that assumption that I just made, that you're selling on your website, then nobody's going to share that content, because by sharing it, you're going to look like a shill of their sales organization, right? So
Mm-hmm.
because the content is salesy, it's all branded, and if I share it, it makes me look like I'm actually promoting the vendor, not the point of view, and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yep.
If you want somebody to guest blog on your blog, and it's a branded blog, it's much harder to get an influencer or a thought leader to do that on your blog, and for it to resonate. So what we've done, and what I've done in the past, is to create a kind of an off-brand content hub where you do no selling, really. You just promote your point of view, and then you find that people get much more engaged in that kind of platform. You find that influencers are more likely to work with you. They're more likely to write for that kind of publication, because it gains some kind of credibility, and the credibility is dependent on the editorial. I mean, if you look at, for example, the way that CMO.com has kind of gone over the years. I mean, I'm presuming you remember it way back in the old days when it was owned by the folks that Adobe purchased, right? The web analytics guys. And it had, in the beginning, it had this sort of purity that it was genuinely a resource for CMOs. And then, and right now, if you look at it, it just looks like Adobe's blog. Yeah. And I think that Adobe can probably now get away with that, because they have that reputation in the marketplace, but not a lot of people can. And I think if you're genuine with your editorial, and you genuinely create useful content that people will engage with, then you can have a successful content hub. And it's a safe place, is the way that I've described it, a safe place for you to then start to engage with people, engage with influencers, and even analysts will start to get involved with something like that, rather than on your salesy blog, on your salesy website, which is completely relevant, right? You need to have a salesy website. We need to be getting revenue done, right?
Yep.
You know my awareness, revenue, and trust thing. Absolutely, I want people giving me their email addresses and all that kind of stuff. But it's a good way to start meeting those very there's people who aren't quite ready for your solution yet, but want to kind of understand your take on the category. And so therefore I am absolutely a proponent of those things.
I think they are a great idea, but I find it is a struggle to kind of convince some brands that this is something they need to do.
Yeah. I think, yes. And I didn't answer your second question. Your second question is it right for everybody? And like any marketing strategy, it isn't. It's like, should we be on TikTok? No, probably not. Yeah. Should we, and I think some people don't even need a Twitter account. And it depends on where you're at, right? And it's the same with something like this. I think that it depends on the nature of your business and the nature of the relationship you have with your audience, and where you're perceived within your category, and also whether you actually have the resources and the patience to make it work. Because something like this and that sort of plays to the question you just asked, is something like this isn't a quick win. I can't lie about that. It takes time, because you're building a community, you're building an audience, you're gaining trust and credibility, you're getting it out there, and then what you're actually building is a paid media channel for yourself. So then you start advertising on this thing, and then you'll start getting pull through from that. But of course, from day one, it's not a valuable paid media channel. You'd never sponsor it as a CMO. You have to build that yourself. I also think there's another benefit to this, and I think that with cookie legislation coming in and all that good stuff, is that, and when we get to privacy, for organizations to start to build their own media channels, however big or small they are, I think that's going to start becoming a very important part of the marketing mix, because you don't need to worry about that. You need to be very explicit about how you're going to use your privacy. And my recommendation there is you keep these things separate. So you have your community on your content hub, you have your newsletter, all that kind of stuff, but you don't sell on that. You then have ads, have people click through to the ads, and then they, through the standard landing page on your website stuff, download whatever, and then they agree to be contacted by the vendor, right? You need to make sure you keep these communities pure, but it does give you a really good insight. And I think when I did this at SDL, we found that people that came through the content hub converted much quicker, because they'd already kind of qualified themselves. They'd already had the same point of view as you. They're now ready to buy, and they're interested in talking to you.
last question before you go. I have to ask you about Rockstar CMO
Yeah,
because it's a
sure.
really great publication. What
Yeah.
made you kind of decide to start it?
Well, I had the idea quite a long time ago, and grabbed the URL, and I wondered how I was going to do it. But this again was it started life as its most recent incarnation as a content hub. So I was working for Accenture. I was CMO at Accenture. We were a German software company, not very well known outside of Germany. I wanted to, and my remit was to sort of grow the business to the UK and the US, and I wanted to create something that would enable us to have a conversation with marketers who wouldn't normally have a conversation with us. So and with influencers as well. So I involved some of the influencers, and we got Rockstar CMO going. Since I've left, because I own the property, I've continued to maintain it with their permission. Because I own the URL, I own all of it. So they were a sponsor for a while, and that worked for them. And now I've maintained it, and we've got such a really nice community. And again, it's differentiated. I don't go for listicles. I don't try and grow the traffic hugely. I'm more interested in having a really engaged audience on that.
You have some really great voices on there. I mean, getting Robert Rose on anything is awesome because he's such a wide perspective and really great to listen to and talk to. But also people that I've never heard of that just are talking about really interesting things that are worth it's definitely a publication that I would recommend that everybody kind of sign up for.
Well, thank you,
and
Bob.
it's fun too because you always put the kind of rock star, the lyrics. And when I did the one piece for you, I was like, oh my god.
Yeah, well, I have to ask you for another one. But we and it's a difficult balance because I don't want to overdo the rock star thing. And the other thing I don't want people to think is that I'm a rock star CMO. No, that isn't what I was saying. What I'm trying to say is exactly as you. I'm really glad you observed that. Is I want to expose some voices you don't normally hear, and just genuine, real people that are in senior marketing positions that have an opinion about stuff. And like you say, it's really interesting what you hear from folks who are really they're not trying to be Gary Vaynerchuk or whatever. They're just themselves, and this is what they've got to say.
Yeah, it's definitely worth everyone listening to.
Thank you.
So, thanks, Ian. This was really great. There's lots of good information here. I really appreciate it.
I feel we might have gone long, but thank you very much for giving me the time.